The latest from legendary, iconic director Martin Scorsese. Scorsese. Marty is Killers of the Flower Moon. This is an epic tale. It is 3.5 hours in length. Just getting that out of the way. I don't mind a long movie, but let's take a little side note. Studios, filmmakers, theaters, let's bring back the intermission. I saw The Right Stuff in the theater when I was a kid. Intermission in the middle. At that point, people still remembered what an intermission was. You got to go to the bathroom? Hey, there's an intermission. You don't miss any of the movie. You hungry? You don't want to miss any of the movie? Hey, there's an intermission where you can go and buy more food, which is what keeps theaters in business. A 10 or 15-minute intermission ain't going to kill anybody. If you build it in right, the Bollywood films do this most of the time. You build it in right. It's at a certain point in the movie. Everybody takes a little tiny break and they come back and they watch the rest of the movie and it's great. And theaters are not going to miss out on showtimes because honestly, if you're playing 2.5, 3.5, 4.5 hour movies, you're not going to gain an extra showtime by not putting that little 10 minutes in there. Getting that out of the way. So yes, it's a long movie. Everybody's talking about, oh God, it's a long movie, whatever. I don't mind a long movie if it's good. This movie is good. What's this movie about? It's about 3.5 hours. What? Leonardo DiCaprio stars as a simple man coming back from World War I to his uncle Robert De Niro's ranch in Osage land. I believe it's Oklahoma, but don't send cards and letters if I get any of the facts of this case wrong. Based on true events, I believe. It's an area where the Native Americans struck oil. It was a Native American reservation, and they struck oil. And the Native Americans, in this case, it is the opposite of a lot of what you might call at one point minorities in this country, where they're the rich ones. They're the ones who are more or less, the affluent ones in town. And it's the white folks coming to try to pick up the scraps from the Native Americans. Robert De Niro is a cattle rancher. He's a landowner. He doesn't have oil money. He's not involved with that, but he is a benefactor to the town because he's also rich, and he is a friend to the Native American, or so we think at the beginning of this film. He takes DiCaprio under his wing, who has no other place to go, and he sort of shows him the ropes and how things are in this strange dynamic of this town with the Osage people. There's nefarious stuff going on here. I really don't want to get into the trailer shows you what's going on. If you know me, if you've ever watched any of my reviews or discussions or whatever you want to call these ramblings, I really don't like to give anything away because everything should be a surprise as it unfolds in the movie. Let's just say DiCaprio falls for a local native woman portrayed by Lily Gladstone. Had to look. I hadn't seen her in anything before. She was really good. And De Niro wants to pull some strings in some dark ways to make sure that DiCaprio inherits the money that is owed to his new wife. Let's just put it that way. There's some sinister stuff going on in this movie. There's a sense of dread throughout the film. Even if you go in blind, not quite knowing where the story is going to go, it's really dark and it's really grim. And like any Scorsese movie, there are just moments where just violence matter-of-factly bursts and you're just like, wow. And like the audience, literally, I saw it with opening night, it kind of gasped at times. And there were moments where people were really audibly reacting to the film. Yes, it's long. I never felt the length of this film until toward the end. I'm not going to give anything away, but let's say there's a courtroom thing toward the end. And when we got toward that, I started to feel like, okay, this is feeling a little repetitive. This could move on. But it was interesting throughout. The machinations that go on throughout are just sinister. Sinister is a word that kept popping in my mind throughout this film. And it's set in, I couldn't tell you exactly when this is set. It's probably early 1900s. I know there's a tag at the end of this that takes place in the radio audio, radio theater era that makes me think that this was decades before that. So let's say early 1900s. There were automobiles and telephones and things like that, simple telephones. And Scorsese seems to have strived for accuracy on this film. When I saw this at the Alamo Drafthouse near me, there was a little video with Scorsese right before the film started, thanking everybody for coming out to the movies and supporting the film, and saying that he did everything he could to make this as authentic to the Osage people and Native American tradition and experience as possible, which was greatly appreciated. Some of the best aspects of the movie are the aspects of Native American culture and the Native American actors they got in the film to portray the roles. There's one sequence where bad stuff is happening in this town, and all of the elders and the tribe people come together and with some of the Caucasian townspeople, and this guy sort of speaks from his heart. And I don't know if it was scripted or if it was loosely scripted or if Scorsese said, here's in general what you need to say it. It felt so real and so natural. It was great. I love the use of non-actors in movies. That was something that early 70s movies did really well. And sometimes non-actor means, wow, that person's really terrible. But sometimes non-actor means this feels like a real person. This makes the movie feel more real. Deliverance did that incredibly well. Easy Rider did that incredibly well. And this film, Killers of the Flower Moon, does it really well too. DiCaprio is good. He's always good, but he's got this weird like lower cheek jowly implant thing that I found a little distracting in the movie, because maybe just we know what he looks like, you know. It just it felt like he always had chaw in his mouth, and maybe that's what it was. Maybe it was supposed to be he always had chewing back. I don't know. That was a little weird, but overall performance is really good. Some familiar faces, a huge cast in this movie, to the degree where when the credits came up, it was multiple columns like flashing on screen. And it was a lot. You couldn't really keep up with it. And I just looked it up on IMDb just off camera. And it was a lot of scrolling to see all the names. It was a really large cast in this film. It just, like I said, it really nails the era for what I know, having lived through that era. It really nails the era and the vibe of this place that's kind of loosely being held together. There's law and order, and the white man still kind of runs things, which was a little weird, where all the Native Americans, they're the rich ones, they get all the money, but basically it's like Uncle Sam is cutting them checks. So they're still kind of tethered. They're still technically on a reservation. Some of them still kind of have to ask if they can leave, or they have to ask if they can do certain things, because it sounds like they probably have to have a white person to say okay for certain things. So it's an interesting dynamic. In many ways, it's like a flip-flop of the dynamic that went throughout a lot of American history, where the Caucasians were in power and the people from somewhere else or other skin colors or whatever you want to call it were in the minority. And you sort of see a reverse of that here, which is interesting. And Scorsese uses some really interesting techniques. There was a shot in that little teaser that is not part of the movie, where Scorsese was thanking you for coming to the theater, and you see him looking through an old camera, and there's a lot of like newsreel type footage at the beginning of this, or silent movie looking footage, that I'm wondering if they actually used. It looks like they actually used vintage cameras and film to do that, which is really cool. It's a really interesting visual dynamic of the film, which is not to say it's wildly stylish. It's just a solid flick. Scorsese doesn't make bad movies. He makes solid movies. Some I like more than others, but you can always dependably get an intelligent, good film out of Scorsese. And Thelma Schoonmaker, whose name again I probably mispronounced, still editing. She's been editing for him since at least Raging Bull, maybe earlier than that, and still cutting his movies. It's great. So very, very good film. Interesting, serious drama. Not really any laughs. A couple snickers here and there, but really it's a pretty grim, serious movie. There are sequences of this that felt like Goodfellas to me, where just like dominoes are falling and a lot of violence is happening and a lot of nasty stuff is happening. There is interpersonal dynamics that are just insane in this film. Again, I don't want to give anything away, but the things DiCaprio does, eventually he has to say those things in front of his wife in public, and then has to talk to her. Again, I'm not trying to give anything away, but there's this scene where it's just like, he has just given away how horrible a person he is to this woman he allegedly loves, and things that deeply affected her personally, and he has to say it while she's looking at him in public, and then he has to meet with her privately. And what's that conversation like? See the movie to find out. One qualm that I had with the film was, and I'm not going to give it away, but let's speak in broad terms. If you watch this after you've seen it, or if you see it and then you think back to what I say, you can let me know what you thought of it. The very end of the movie, it doesn't do what I was hoping it would do. What I like a lot of times is when something's based on a true story, the story goes up to a point, and then you either get photos of the real people with text blocks saying, and here's what happened to them. This film does it in a different way, that while I was watching the movie, I think now I understand what he was trying to say and why he was doing it, but in the moment watching the movie, I thought it severely undercut the gravitas of everything that had come before it. And it felt really like silly and comedic and throwaway. Now, I think, again, I'm not going to get into specifics, but I think the reason he did that was to say that something De Niro says in the movie, all of this is going to pass, people are going to forget, and it's just going to be an unfortunate incident. What you see at the end of the movie that gives the wrap up and, what happened to all the characters feels real. It feels like that. It feels very much while I'm watching the movie that, wow, this trivializes everything we just watched. And I think that was his point. I think he was trying to say decades have passed since this thing happened, and now it's just a footnote and a piece of fluff entertainment. But it's just, I feel like maybe in my head, here I'm second guessing Scorsese. I feel in my head that there might have been a different way to do that, that still got that across, but didn't suddenly make me feel like I was watching a cheap comedy. It was really kind of weird. There's a lot of interesting casting in this film. At that last point I was talking about has an actor whose name I don't know, but you would recognize. There's a lot of that in this. Barry Corbin is in this movie, by the way. Barry Corbin, who was on Evening Shade, he was in a million things going back to the early 80s at least, is in this. Looks a lot different because he's much older now, but the voice is still the same. You get Jack White is in it. You get like Pete Yorn. You get musicians, Sturgill Simpson, who I don't even really know who he is. I might have mispronounced his name too, but he's like an actor in the movie. Scorsese is in the movie. That's another thing too. Scorsese being in the movie kind of yanked me out of the movie. Like, I like him. I like him a lot. I love that he's still making movies. I love that he's opinionated about films and all this stuff, and that he gives a care about almost did that. He cares about cinema and cinema history and filmmaking and the art of it all. But him being in the movie in the role that he was, it kind of yanked me out of it. I'm like, hey, it's Marty on screen. Very good movie. See it in the theater. Everything's better in the theater. Support theaters. Theaters need it. Theaters are going to hit a dry spell pretty soon as I record this, because these strikes have been going on so long. You remember COVID, post-COVID, when we had like no new movies in the theaters and it was a lot of weird indie stuff and oldies? We're probably going to see that again. So go see movies, please, in the theater. Yes, it's expensive, but if you want the ability to see a movie in the theater, you have to go see movies in the theater, or it's going to go away and it's just going to be streaming. And that's honestly not that much fun. So anyway, rant over. Killers of the Flower Moon in theaters now. Yes, it's long. It's really good. In theaters now.